So let's take a look at what we did last time. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. I forgot to save it actually. Let's grab our cylinder blueprint here. And what we can do, and this is, if you're in my class, was your assignment. Um, we can make a little duck game, sort of like these circus games. So let's hit Control W to duplicate this. So we have our carnival game here. So this is what we have last time. So you press play. Alright, so let's take a look at what we can do next. What we're going to do is adjust the character controller. Take a look at that, the component they give us here, and how we can add some additional attributes to it. So inside of the blueprints folder, just go ahead and double click first person character blueprint. And let's take a look. There seems to be a lot going on here, but it's a lot easier than you might think. So let's just start off with the stick input, because we're not really going to be looking at motion controllers or VR stuff. And let's dock this up here. Let's be tweaking that. Let's move some of this stuff out of the way. So some things to take note of is the red nodes, these trigger nodes, they run at every frame and they pass the values, for example, like turn rate here and lookup rate, and so you can see here's base lookup rate from the controller input. And these values are commonly mapped to the left and right axis of your thumbstick, the analog stick that's on your PS4 or your Xbox One controller. Then the values from those triggers are multiplied by a variable. You can see that here, representing it's the rate in which the player is like intended to turn, look, or turn around or look left and right. And then those values are multiplied by delta time, which is what we did last time. You can see that down here. So you can see here's your axis. Here's our get world delta time. So below this input we have the mouse input. Here, let me zoom in a little bit better so you can see here. It converts input from your mouse, and this is opposed to the controller axis. And it converts it just pretty much for all the other movements. So you can see here, input, look up, turn, your left, right, and your forward. It doesn't really do a rotation. If you rotate your mouse, it really doesn't do anything. So let's take a look at customizing this. Let's go back to our first person controller here. Go to Edit, Project Settings, and off to the side here, look for Input. So under the Engine section, you'll see something called Bindings. And there's two categories, Action Mapping and Axis Mapping. Action Mapping is used for key presses and mouse clicks, pretty much events that trigger player actions. Axis Mapping, which is this guy down here, is meant for mapping player movement and events that have a range. So if you push the W key or the S key, it moves the character forward and back, but on different ends of the range. So let's start off with our action mapping here. You can see we have jump, fire, reset VR. We're going to press plus twice, and it gave us two new action mapping functions. What we want to do for our first one is we want to add a sprint. So I'm going to name this sprint. And then when you click on this, it's going to give you these different inputs. So if we go to keyboard and we expand this, you'll see we get all of our different keyboard inputs. I'm going to do left shift. And to help our game out a little bit more, our duck shooting game, I'm going to name this zoom. And I'm going to map this to my right mouse button. So go ahead and click this, look for mouse, and then we want to do right mouse button here. All right, let's maximize this to make sure that we've got everything in place. Okay, let's close that out. All right, so let's add let's start with our sprint ability. So go ahead and go up to your first person character here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. All right, so up here, I'm going to create a new set of nodes. So we want to get that sprint input that we just created. So I'm going to right click in here and I'm going to type in input and sprint. There it is. And let's zoom in a little bit on this. Now, just so that we can, just like they commented here, I'm going to highlight this and I'm going to hit Control C. Or I'm sorry, just the C key. And for my comment, I'm going to type in sprint input or something like that. We could always change our comment later, and then you can adjust the size of a comment by moving this around. Now, our character itself has a speed component, and that's what we want to edit when we hold shift. So I'm going to drag this out and I'm going to drop it here. Now, something I want to point out is if you notice anything that says inherited at the end, see it says source at the bottom, inherited from C++. This is a script that was actually written in C++, and most of that stuff, all the heavy lifting with physics calculations and stuff related to movements is usually written in C++, and then later we can take it into a movement. So we can actually edit this in the header file. All right, so let's go ahead and drag this out, and we're going to look for max walk speed. You can see there's set max walk speed, and we're just going to get it. You can see, I just want to show you this, that the default value of this is 600. So if we delete this and we go to set walk speed, you can see in here, this allows us to adjust that 600 value inside of here. So if we grab our pressed node and we connect it here, now when we press our left key, we'll access this walk speed. I'm also going to change this to 2200 because if our walk is 600, we want him to really sprint at 2200. So we also want our character to slow down. So I'm going to grab out another set walk speed from here. And what's going to happen is when we release our left mouse button and we select it in here, once it's pressed, it'll shoot up to 2200, and once we release it, it'll transition or slow down to whatever the walk speed is that we put in here. So I'm going to go back down to the default 600 because that's our walk speed. All right, so let's select this and make sure that everything is inside this comment box. Kind of move these guys in a little bit too. All right, I'm going to compile this and I'm going to save it and press play. Now, if I move forward with my arrow keys and I hold shift, you'll see he sprints. So here's his normal walk speed, and now he sprints.